Rachel Marshall, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you on and talk about your book.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. It's a delight and honor to be here.
So the title of the book is Seven Generations, and it's about wealth building. And may I assume that it's about building wealth for many, many generations to come?
Yes, indeed. And really a concept that I think is super important, yet off the radar of many of us.
Definitely. So, you opened the book with, a real punch, which is about how you almost, passed away while giving birth, and how that then impacted you. So real quick, give us a little bit about that story and what it got you thinking.
Yeah, well, it was definitely something that was not at all on my radar.
Right.
I was pregnant with my second daughter. Things are going really well. We did induce. There was a little bit of potential complications towards the end for the baby. And after delivering, everything seemed fine until I ended up having a problem with my placenta not detaching correctly. And that kind of spiraled into a situation where they took me back for surgery, which caused a hemorrhage, which then they said that I bled out at least 2 liters of blood, and that they were trying to stop the bleeding. They couldn't.
That's like half the amount of, like 40% of the blood we have in us, right?
I did some research afterwards, and after they told me that they did a transfusion of 8 units of blood, then I had to convert what is a unit, and figuring out that basically that was all of the blood in my body had been replaced by the time everything was said and done. And
wow,
it was crazy that I'm waking up about 4 hours after I last saw the clock. I'm waking up and I'm wondering, what are all these bright lights? There's all these faces around me, and I'm just really aware that my life is a gift. Just in that moment, the very first coming to moment, this feeling pervaded me, just saying, I'm so thankful to be alive to see another day. And then the recognition happened later as I was kind of understanding the story, that I was so near death. I had another complication that happened on top of that, where essentially my blood was clotting all throughout my body and at risk of causing complications in my organs and my brain. And that was taking away the clotting factor that was needed to stop the bleeding. And so it was this like vicious cycle that the only way you can stop that is through blood transfusion. And it was caused through the complications of delivery. And so I say I should probably put a disclosure at the beginning of the book that if somebody is expecting a baby, that we maybe don't read the first 2 chapters or put the book on the shelf until after. I thought it was really important to tell this story, though, because I had no idea. It wasn't like, oh, hey, Rachel, your health is a really big concern. We have some warning lights. Here's a lot of concerns on the horizon for you. Everything was amazing and perfect. And I had this wonderful pregnancy. And all of a sudden, I was faced like a train wreck, this reality that my life is not a guarantee. And so many times, especially those of us that are young and healthy and in the prime of our life, we think, I have life insurance for a potential if type of situation. And, we don't really live face to face with our mortality.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just having a coaching call with a client, and we were talking about worst case scenarios. And I gave him a few because he had never thought about worst case scenarios, and he runs, some real estate investing businesses and coaching businesses, and he's an MD and all of this sort of stuff. And it's like, you never, ever know what's waiting for you around the corner. So what did that get you thinking? And kind of have a little spoiler. I know that you and your husband, his name's Lucas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So you and Lucas, sounds like you and Lucas are like me. You love thinking, or at least you do. You love thinking forward into the future a lot. We spend a lot of time visioning. So maybe you and Lucas had done a little bit of conversation about the generational wealth and the trusts and wills that we're going to talk about today. But what, once you got, kind of you're over the shock of this, where did your mind go in terms of protecting your family?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of phrasing the question. And I mean, for us, it was a miraculous recovery. I mean, honestly, within 24 hours after having been unconscious for 45 minutes, I was able to go back to the room, be reunited with my baby girl. And I was basically cleared health-wise at that point. So it was extremely critical and acute. But what really got me thinking, I'm sitting in the hospital afterwards and just thinking, this baby girl is in my arms, I'm alive, life is so precious. And I think we all feel that from time to time if we really are honest. But I just started realizing that I am really, really meant to be here if I'm here. And that's the same that's true for every single one of you listening. If you're here, you're absolutely meant to be. And if you're here and you're meant to be, then what is that purpose that you're meant to be for? And then that got me thinking even further to say, there's a lot of things that I want to invest in my kids. At the time, I had a 8-year-old daughter and this brand new baby. There's a lot of life I want to live with them, a lot of things I want to create. And yes, I'm very forward thinking. I'm the future person, and my husband is very much the ground in reality person. We complement each other really well. And what's interesting is we just started saying, what if we're not guaranteed this 80-year running track ahead of us, or maybe 75 if we live to 120 years, if we have this magical, amazing, long lifespan, what if we don't get all of that? And what if at any point we are gone? How do we make sure that the moments that we did have with our kids and on this earth mattered the most? And that's really what got us thinking differently about, well, let's not just have a life insurance plan in place, and let's not just have an estate plan that's kind of oh, by the way, if anything happens, it'll just, kind of make sure that the next generation is taken care of. But we really leaned into that question of, what if something happened tomorrow? What would we want to have completely laid out, a full plan, so that not only was the money there to take care of our kids, but also to live out the dreams that we had created with them, even in our absence, and then also transfer the money to them in a way that they had instructions on how to use it so that they could accomplish those goals.
Yeah, and I love how you bring in, having the values and vision for your future, and things that no parent wants to think about, such as who's going to raise your kid when and if you do pass away early, and if somebody else is raising your children, how are they going to raise them according to their values or according to your values? And you cover so much of this in the book. But I want to go back even a little bit further, because obviously, as I read the book, I'm like, wow, this is clear that Rachel has some background in the financial industry. She's done a lot of thinking about this, clearly is an expert in this area, whereas I'm not. So you start using some terms and you understand some terms a lot better than I do. So what was your origin story? Like, what is your career? What do you do as your day job in addition to writing the book, so that everyone can understand why you're an expert and we need to listen to you on this?
Yeah, thank you for asking the question in that way. So I'll back up several years. My husband and I, as we were getting ready to get married, we started talking about, what are we going to do with our life? He had taken a big break between high school and college. So he was back in college studying computer science and computer programming. We got married and finished our last 2 years of our bachelor's degrees together. And so what was interesting is we just started saying, what do we really want our life to look like? And we started saying, well, we want to start a business someday. We'd both read Robert Kiyosaki's book, and we had both decided we wanted to be over on the right side of that cash flow quadrant, some type of a business owner and an investor where we're making money work for us. And we leapt into that after the birth of our first daughter. So we said, I have all this time on my hands. I stopped working in HR at that time and human resource management, and really said, hey, what can we do now to really get started in owning a business? And so we started a health insurance agency at the time, and we started selling people health insurance. And from that point, we realized, well, everyone who needs health insurance also is needing more than just health insurance. We were only working with business owners because they were the ones who said, we don't have health insurance offered by our employer. And so they were business owners. They had a whole comprehensive need for managing cash flow and creating the space to grow their business. And so that got us thinking on the business side of finance. And we personally, at the same time, we're trying to figure out, how are we going to build wealth as a family? So fast forward a little bit, we decided to look in, well, first we were storing cash in gold and silver. And I share that just because as forward-thinking people. And also my husband is a history, I would say almost expert. He studied a lot of economics and was very self-taught in that. Started looking at Austrian economics and Federal Reserve and monetary policy. And that all led us to this reasoning that we wanted to be in financial control ourselves. We didn't just want to trust that, we'll just put our money in the stock market and hope everything works out.
Well,
so we were,
can I just interrupt you and say,
yeah.
and ask you a quick yes or no question? Are you optimistic or pessimistic for the future, the financial future of the country?
Oh my, that's a loaded question. I am always optimistic, and I am optimistic because I choose an abundance perspective. And I think that no matter how bad things may look, I think there's always opportunity. And as entrepreneurs, we love freedom and we create opportunity when there is problems and when there's blood in the streets. I can't remember exactly who said that. I should have had that.
I think it was a Rothschild that said that originally.
I think so. And that was, the reference was to have cash on hand so that you can invest when there's blood in the streets or when there's really terrible times. So I would say I'm optimistic for people who are entrepreneurially minded and thinking about how to create opportunity and create value for other people.
Yeah. Excellent. So back to your husband, he's a, an economics, a history buff, and, you yourself, your business, what is your business now, Rachel?
So our business right now, so it's the Money Advantage, and we help business owners to really keep in control more of their cash. We learned the lesson by storing money in gold and silver. Then we realized that we needed access to capital when it was at a low point. We realized that we needed a better place to store cash that was able to get to when we needed it, and that it was safe, it wasn't going to drop in value, and it was also growing. And so that led us personally in our personal financial exploration to whole life insurance, specifically specially designed whole life insurance that builds cash value that you can use. And so this was something that we help people with. I'll fast forward ahead. So that was something that we first learned and became consumers and clients of, and really sought to understand what this could do for us, but not just as a product, as a strategy of storing capital, having access to reserves, being in a position of liquidity so that you have that cash to take advantage of other opportunities and to invest in your business. And so right now, as the Money Advantage, we really help enterprising families and wealth creators to be in a position that they are storing their cash in the best place possible and thinking holistically about their financial life so that every piece is complementing their goals to build cash flow and control.
What do you think some of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs and even high income, highly paid corporate earners are making with the money that they have either sitting in the bank or just sitting in very basic investments? Like, what are some traditional mistakes that you see that you like to see people correct?
You ask fabulous questions, Craig. So first, I would say being passive. I think that's probably one of the greatest mistakes, expecting to just be able to passively invest and set money aside, even if it's an automatic deduction or an automatic set aside into a retirement plan, and then just be hands off and hope things work out. I think that is not really investing in learning and understanding how to be in control. I would say the second top mistake is thinking about accumulation. I mean, if you're just thinking about, well, I want to get to 1 million or 2 million or even a 10 million nest egg, if you're just looking for the nest egg, the model that goes along with that is I build up cash. I hope that it doesn't drop in value. I want to build up a certain dollar amount. And when I hit my money dollar amount, everything's good because I can live off the interest, not deplete the principal, and hopefully retire and live through the rest of my life. I think that model is completely flawed because you're out of control. And most people would have to have a much higher nest egg than they expect to have the income off of that they want. And so really instead, it's thinking about how do I create cash flow today? And often that's through businesses and things like real estate.
And what's your and Lucas's position on cryptocurrencies?
That is a good question. So I personally do not own any crypto. I'll just say that out
Sure.
of
No,
the
no
gate
worries.
here. And what's really interesting is I know that people who are in crypto, who are very wise and calculating decision makers, I believe that you should invest in what you know and control.
Mhm.
So if you have the ability to know what you're doing and have control in that arena, that is an investment where you can change. If something is going up or down, you can get out. You have an exit strategy. Or if you're in a position where you can control whether it goes up or down. I personally do not know enough about crypto. I'm not interested enough at this point to divert my attention into learning about it. So I'm personally not invested in it. I think that it is something that's definitely growing and it's becoming much more mainstream and accepted as a currency and as a medium of exchange, which is all that dollars are as well. And if somebody is willing to invest the time in truly understanding that, I think that there is a good future in investing in that. I just personally do not invest in everything that might be a good opportunity. I'm focused just in growing my greatest opportunities.
What type of real estate do you tend to be in?
Yeah. So when we're looking at investments, primarily we're investing right now in our business. It's the number one growth position that we have to have the greatest rate of return. And really, almost every business owner we talk to would say the same thing. When I look at real estate, most of the people that we're talking with and the people that we follow and where we ultimately want to be as well, as investing in real estate specifically for cash flow. Because if you're in a position of just investing for a flip or that accumulation, that's much more speculative. Whereas you can truly build generational wealth by having assets that are tangible, that create cash flow. And what's really interesting is that you'll see a lot of similarities. I mentioned life insurance earlier, and I don't want to turn off any of your listeners who maybe aren't very familiar with life insurance, but there's a lot of things that you can look at in multiple investing platforms that you really want to have, which are things like an actual physical asset. And you want to have tax advantages, and you want to have the ability to earn interest, not just pay interest. You want to have the appreciation as well, but you really want to be thinking about, how do I create cash flow today? Because if I can invest for cash flow right now, then I don't have to wait until I retire to hit that magic income point.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my friends and coaching clients, Chris Larson, he was making $300,000 a year as a medical device salesperson. And through hard work and study and all that sort of stuff over the past 10 years, he was able to build up his passive income from real estate and through whole life insurance as well. He was able to quit his job. He now makes multiple fold that $300,000, and he's not spending 3 days a week in the hospital, sleeping there overnight sometimes, because he had built up so much. Most of his real estate investments are in the multifamily space, and so it's amazing to see what people are able to do. And that's why I wanted to ask that question, is because I'm quite fascinated with it as well. Because I have I wouldn't say it's passive, but my income comes from multiple businesses, but not enough from real estate. That's why I was very curious to hear about that. Now, before we get to the whole life insurance, I want to spend a little bit of time on the wills and trusts. So anybody that's ever watched a cheesy murder mystery has heard about a will, and it's like, oh, well, the person died, and they look at who the beneficiaries were in the will, and oh my goodness, they changed it to this person. They must be the murderer. So we're familiar with wills, but what the heck is the difference between a will and a trust? And when is a will not good enough? And if a will isn't good enough, why do people even have them in the first place? And all sorts of questions around that. I'd love to hear your breakdown for us non-financial folks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And here's kind of what it boils down to. I need to give a preface here. I'm not an estate planning attorney. Now, in our space, we have a family office model, and that means we have financial professionals in a lot of different areas that all are questions and concerns that you have about your financial life, and we help you coordinate that through that family office model. So, however, I am not an estate planning attorney, so I'm not on the legal side personally. But here's what I know. When you're in a position of really building long-term assets, so especially if you have real estate, especially if you have businesses, especially if you have assets across multiple states, especially if you have minor children, especially if you have special needs children, especially if there could potentially be divorce or lawsuits or anything of this nature in any capacity in your family. And it sounds like I'm explaining a lot of situations which potentially could befall almost anyone. When you are, and the reason I say that is if you have a simple estate, it's possible that a will would survive and would handle everything that you need to do as long as your assets are titled correctly, and you would be able to do what you're hoping to do by passing your legacy and your estate down to children and grandchildren afterwards. What really a trust is a full comprehensive legal planning system. So you normally would have a healthcare power of attorney, a will, and a trust within a full estate plan. And a trust simply is like our attorney explained it like this. It's like a treasure chest where you're putting your assets into this treasure chest and you're holding them in the treasure chest. So they're not in your personal name. Your assets are in the name of your trust. What can happen is that you do not physically own the trust assets. They're inside this trust. And then you can pass them to your children, and they can also stay in trust as they're passed to your children. The benefit of this, and let me kind of step out of any legalese type of speak here, but the benefit of this is really that if there were claims against your children in the future, say a creditor or somebody was out to get them, or they went through divorce or something like that, they would, if assets had passed directly to them, those assets would be subject to taxation or creditors, and they're not fully secured for the behalf of the child and then carrying wealth on down through the generations. So ultimately, you want to be thinking, how can I make sure that I don't just pass wealth to the next generation? How do I protect it so that it can truly accomplish the purpose that I set up, that I intend for it? Are you still there?
Yeah, my internet seems to be really slow. Sorry about that, but we
okay.
caught everything there. So when you talk about the vision and passing on, like how you want children to be raised, if worst case scenario, if something happens to you, where does that fall into place with the trust and the will?
This was something that was really a big question for my husband and I as we started really digging into this planning. And ultimately, there's lots of different ways that attorneys will set up a trust. And sometimes they just can put in something that's a very standard for most people, that is a typical way of doing things. And we realized that that was not going to accomplish the purpose that we had. So originally our trust just handled only one child because we only had one daughter. And I think we had an outright distribution of assets at age 25. What that meant is that if something happened to both my husband and I, she as a minor under age 18 is not even able to receive assets. So she can't have life insurance pay out to her. She can't hold millions of dollars of assets in whatever our estate was. But that would all pass directly to her at age 25. This was in our first setup of our trust. And we realized that that wasn't going to accomplish the purpose, because what if she wasn't prepared to make decisions with that capital at that time? What if we weren't able to instill in her this stewardship and this values and this way of understanding being a producer and managing money and being a wealth creator? What if we hadn't had that time and now she's just getting all this cash? And we started really looking in our own lives at this problem that confronts so many wealthy families. And there's a proverb that is persistent throughout cultures, and you may have heard this before. It's called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, you also hear rice paddy to rice paddy in 3 generations, or clogs to clogs in 3 generations.
Actually, first of all, because some people might not have heard that or understand what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard it, but why don't you just share what that means?
So it's this idea that the first generation is in a situation that's maybe a blue collar worker, and they decide, I am going to create something of myself. I want to become wealthy. And they create enterprise and they create wealth. Well, the second generation sees that work ethic and sees the discipline and what really it took to create the wealth in the first place, but they start being able to live the lifestyle that is commensurate with this new level of income and production that is in the family. So then generation 2 gives birth to generation 3, and the only thing that generation 3 knows is that they're accustomed to this high standard of living. They don't see the work ethic and the production that went into it in the first place. And so it's this arc where you start out in poverty, the first generation rises out of poverty and creates wealth. The second generation kind of stays there. And by the third generation, they've dissipated and spent all the wealth and they land back in poverty again. And it's this problem of the wealthy that happens when you just think about transferring money and you don't think about developing people. And that's really what got us thinking that we need to find a way to develop people so that they can manage money well.
And you spend a lot of time on your family core values in your book. And one other thing that I should mention from your book is I think that the entire process of you and Lucas thinking about so many of these things was more than an 8-year process. And so, eventually you get to this thinking about, well, as much as important as it is to pass on family wealth, we also want to pass on the family values. So what was the exercise that you and Lucas did to extract the core values that are really kind of the guiding principles of and the foundation for the entire system that you're building here?
Well, let me just share why we started to think about putting values in the first place, because we realized that if we were going to create wealth ourselves, and if we wanted our kids to not just receive a lot of money and spend it and have it dissipate, and we wanted them to teach their kids how to create wealth, and we wanted this long-term trajectory of building wealth in our family line, then how would we do that? Well, we realized that we needed a much more focus really on the character and the way that we choose to live. So that got us really thinking about the Constitution. Now, I know you're in Canada, but here in the United States, we have the Constitution of the United States. And really that is the founding document. It gives authority to any leader who is serving the United States government. And so what you look at is this Constitution then can give the direction and give the rules for how somebody should act and operate and give them power and authority. And we realized that we needed essentially a family constitution. So you mentioned that we had a lot of running room up to this. So we've been thinking for a long time about our family values and what we wanted to create in our family. We've read, I can't even say probably hundreds of books in the financial space and the wealth planning space, and realized that we needed to have a way to tell our kids what matters to our family, and really be a family of strength. So one book that I just want to really give credit to is Jim, now I'm messing up his name, Keith Whitaker is the co-author, and James Hughes. They've written books called Family Wealth and Complete Family Wealth. Now those are kind of more in the financial space. Probably more of a practitioner would be the person who'd be interested in reading those books, but they define wealth as human flourishing. And so you can't have money pass on through the family if your family is not flourishing. And so we really started looking at, well, if money isn't even the main focus, what does it mean to have our family be strong and flourish through the generations? Now, they also gave me the idea for 7 generations in the first place, because they brought up this idea that the Iroquois Indians used to use when they made any decisions for their community. They always thought about, how will this decision impact 7 generations in the future? Now, 7 generations is a gigantic amount of time. I think it's very difficult to even say my children's children's children. So it's like my great 5 greats grandchildren. That's how long 7 generations is. And That's approximately 200 years where I'm not going to be living. That's so far out in the future that I know that I am trying to have a great impact out there. So in order to do that, I need to think about the type of people that I'm going to develop in my family line so that we can have a tremendous impact beyond the reach of my own life. So you asked about the exercise for the value system. There's a lot of different exercises that we did, but I think one of the most important was really kind of boiling down specifically our values, because we said, if we live our life but can't articulate what our values are, how will our children know what our values are, and how will they have the capability of living those out? And so we really had some major discussions, and we just started saying, what really is most important to us? So we started thinking, in our lifetime, what are these things that show up on a regular basis? What do we feel is the most important thing to us? What shows up across all these different categories of our life, in our home, in our business, in our kids' lives, in our conversations with friends, in our church, in every place that we show up in life? What is most important? And we started really distilling some things that were important to us. And then we made sure we defined every single one of our core values. I would challenge you, if you are listening to this, go ahead and start talking about what is most meaningful to you and make sure you define it. That really helped us to say, well, you know, these two words really mean something very similar, or one is under the hierarchy of the other one, and they're generally very related. And so we boiled down I think it's eight core values for us. And the top three, I'm actually going to credit to John and Missy Butcher. They've created Lifebook. And I had a conversation with them, and we were talking about family values as well. And they mentioned their top values in their family. It was freedom, responsibility, and then this funny word that was a Japanese word that meant loving mutual respect. And
what's that Japanese word?
I don't know the Japanese word, but I wrote it. I wrote it out in Japanese, but I don't know how to pronounce it in English.
Okay.
But loving mutual respect is the English translation. And what I realized is that at the core of who we are as a family, freedom is extremely important. This intrinsic ability, and we've defined it as the ability to act, think, and speak as we choose. But it goes hand in hand with responsibility, meaning that I have to own the consequences of my actions, and one without the other can't survive. So I need the calibration and that balancing of both. And then everything that I do needs to be in loving mutual respect with all the people around me, because then I'm really uplifting other people and society as a whole and whatever group that I'm in. And so we not only then wrote our family values, we made sure that we posted them on our wall. We have a piece of art that hangs over our dining room table, and it's part of a regular dinner table conversation where we say, hey, this is how we see you exhibiting this particular value, or how can we do things better this week, and how can we focus on this value even more? It's a really, really important part of building a family culture that we feel super proud of, and something that we are going to pass on in the people, not just the money.
Yeah, I imagine that narrowing it down to 8 was difficult.
Yes, it was. I think we started with like 20. So
yeah, it's but it's super powerful. And so one of the things I liked in your book is that you describe yourself as an external processor. Why don't you explain that, and then explain what Lucas is like?
Very, very interesting catch there. So I talk to think. And I need to be able to talk something out in order to arrive at my conclusion, which means if Lucas asks me a question, I either won't talk at first because I'm afraid that he's going to take the first thing that I say as my absolute truth, or I say, hey, look, I need to talk this out first, so just let me talk first. And then I might change my mind 6 times as I'm talking, and then I land on what I really feel and think and mean. So now Lucas, on the other hand, he is an internal processor. When he has something come out of his mouth, he has deliberated, he has thought over that, he has molded over and wrestled over it, and it is his final conclusion the first time it comes out of his mouth. So what that means is that I have to allow him space to internally process and to say, hey, I noticed you're being really silent right now. What's going on inside? And he has to invite me into his process of thinking through something. And I need to be a little bit patient with him and let him know when I'm externally processing.
Got it. That's fascinating. Just was personally interested in that one. You and Lucas clearly have been on the same, it seems like you've been on the same page for a long, long time. What do you say to those people who are single listeners of this podcast and are not yet, haven't found that person who's on the same page? How did you and Lucas discover that you were on the same page? What are some of the difficult conversations and questions that you asked each other early in your relationship to do this and to figure things out? Because I imagine somebody who's listening, and even somebody who's in a committed relationship, somebody listening to this and they take this home to their partner and they say, we really need to do this and this that I heard on this podcast. The partner might look at them as if they have two heads. So I guess that's two different questions. What do you say to the single person in terms of how do you find somebody who can be on the same page? And then what do you say to somebody who's in a committed relationship and wants to take this to their partner and convince them, with all the other things going on in their life, we need to look at our wills and our trusts and our family core values?
Wow, those are some amazing questions. So first I would say, I think Lucas and I both had the benefit of getting married young and growing together. I think at the beginning, we've been married, I want to say, I think we're 15 and a half years now. So because of that, I was 21 when we got married and he was 6 years older than me, but we both grew together. And so we didn't have that, like, I've arrived at my end conclusions in life and so has he, and now we're finding each other. We really started the process of building an enterprise and building a family and building a business and building even our personal growth happened together. And that doesn't mean we were all on the same page the whole time. Sometimes it would mean I was growing and bringing ideas and he was not interested. And sometimes then he was growing and I was like, look, I'm not ready for that kind of thinking yet. And so it was a lot of this, like, iron sharpening iron, and him choosing to grow and me choosing to grow, and also choosing to lovingly let each other evolve. I heard this beautiful definition of love. It was letting others voluntarily evolve.
That's an acronym.
As opposed to, yes.
LOVE.
So as opposed to, here's the way you have to think, or here's the way you need to be, or here's what you have to do. And so I think we both just had we were very blessed to find some just tools for communication and tools for personal growth that helped us to give each other space. And one of them was actually the guy who wrote Respectful Parents, Respectful Kids, has a foreword by Marshall Rosenberg, but a guy who has this tool called nonviolent communication. And that was all just this way of talking and communicating that we own our own emotions, we own our own observations, but we don't make judgments of other people. And that even was really core and crucial for us, realizing that we can't say, you're lazy, you're undisciplined, you're this, you're whatever, but instead saying, I think and I feel this, and would you please do this, and making a request of the other person. So I think that was really key. Nonviolent sounds like, we're not beating each other up. Lucas and I thankfully never were beating each other up, but it was interesting how much we realized our communication was violent communication, even though we were very nonviolent humans. So
the word violence has taken on a much different meaning to me in the last couple of years, like the way that words are violence and all that sort of stuff. But it certainly is very helpful for you to explain it that way.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say, if you are single right now and you're thinking, look, I want to have a huge impact on the world, I want this generational legacy, I want to instill values in children and share values with a partner, I would just encourage you to start by being extremely honest. I think so many times we have all of these external things that we feel we have to do and be, and I want this amount of money for this reason, I want this kind of house for the external display, the feeling of satisfaction, the feeling of success, I want to prove to other people. I think if we get past all of that and realize what we ultimately really, really want, I think we're a lot more similar to most other people than we are different. I think we all ultimately want love. We want that feeling of knowing that we're contributing and we're creating value and that other people recognize that value. I think we want to be givers. We want to be contributors. And I would encourage you to look at figuring out how you can be extremely honest with yourself and then encourage that honesty in others and make space for them to be fully honest as well.
I think that's a really good time to go back and talk about that. Wealth is, what was that description of wealth? That it was people being able to flourish, and
Yes.
then so give me, just show me that description again, and then talk about, like, here are the different things that this really means. Like, here's what real wealth would be under that definition.
So true wealth is not just money. I think way too many times we think of money as wealth. Money is a tool. Money is something that is a medium of exchange. It is a certification that value was exchanged between two people, but it itself is not wealth. True wealth, if you really think about, I am wealthy, it means I am flourishing, I am happy, I am flourishing in all of these different capabilities in my life. So basically, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, I am fully alive. I'm actualizing my potential. This would be on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, not at the bottom where you're focused on survival, but at the top, the self-actualization. This is, I am contributing, I am living my life's highest purpose. I am in my ideal way of being. I am at my best. And if you can think of that definition of wealth in your family, then ultimately you want each person to flourish. And so that means you want your spouse to flourish and you want your children to flourish. And what does that mean? That means honoring their uniqueness and helping them be everything that they're meant to be. And looking, I mean, for instance, I have two kids right now. One daughter is 10 and one is 2. They are as different and as beautifully different as I can possibly imagine. One is extremely imaginative and she's always creating these beautiful, creative, she's extremely creative, gregarious, outgoing, lovely human. My other daughter is, we call her a closer. She closes every door. She finishes every single thing she pushes in every chair. She is working on puzzles. She is calculating. She's figuring out everything, stuff that I'm like, how in the world can you, in this tiny little package of a body, understand how to connect these ideas together? She is amazing in that capacity. She couldn't care less about people. She'll smile at them. She's like, I could take it or leave it. People are just really not as interesting to her. She's very task oriented. And it's interesting that they're both my children and I love them both. And I want to help them both be as great of flourishing in their own uniqueness, not trying to make one be more like the other or one be more like me or tell them that they need to follow a certain career path, but really figuring out what makes them come alive. What is their unique design that they can be most creative, most happy, and give the most value to others. And so that kind of comes down with this whole idea of wealth creation then, and getting money in the first place is when I provide value to somebody else. And I'll give credit to Bob Berg and John David Mann, the Go-Giver, that really highlighted that for me.
I just reread that book in the last 12 months. Tremendous book, and definitely some core value to pass on to the kids. So the last question I want to ask you, Rachel, is what's the number one thing that people who are listening to this and like feeling a tad overwhelmed, what is the number one thing that they can go and do to overcome that overwhelm and get started down the path of generational wealth that takes care of their family and that gives their family wealth and flourishing?
That is awesome. I actually knew you were going to ask that. And I thought, how can I answer this question of how to get started? Because I think it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like, well, what if I just do one step? Is that good enough? What if I get a life insurance policy? What if I just do an estate plan? What if I just think about my values? Really, what I would do is challenge anyone just to pump the brakes for a second. You do have time to put this in place.
Yeah.
But I would say the first thing is just to be extremely aware of the fact that you have a legacy right now, and you are creating, you are writing, you are designing your legacy right now by the way that you live. And it's amazing that we all have that capacity. Yet I think so many times we let it go unnoticed, and we think, well, it'll just be whatever people decide to say about me after I'm gone. But if we can intentionally realize that because we're living and because we exist here today, we have the pen to write what our legacy is. And if we just recognize that power, that gives us tremendous capacity then to think about what we really, really want to create. Not what we're afraid we can't create, not what we think we should create, but what we really can create. And so I would just start first with that realization that you are creating your legacy right now. And then from that place, I would start writing down what is really important to you. It doesn't matter if it's perfectly spelled out, if it's all in, here's your value system, and here's your ideals, and here's your mission, your vision. You can get all of that, and I can walk you through that in the book. It's coming out soon. I know we don't have a date yet. It's going to be
that's why we do the podcast is to light the fire under you to get it all finished up.
Exactly. Oh, the fire is there. It's definitely in the works right now. But what's so interesting is that I would say there's the book, and there's going to be tools and programs and resources for somebody to walk through to put all of these pieces in place. But I would encourage you to start writing and say, what are the words that really encapsulate the meaning that is most important to me? Because the money you can create and set up how to distribute that to future generations. The estate planning, you'll have time to put that in place. The most important thing is thinking about the meaning and how you want to raise up generations after you.
That's actually the wrong answer. And the right answer to the number one thing that you should do after reading Rachel's book is to write love letters to your kids. That was one of my favorite things. I've written a couple to right now. Our little one is still just dating, so she's in the belly of my wife Michelle, and we've written her a few. Awesome. Yeah, we've written her a few letters, and we plan to. And my friend Bedros Keuilian wrote emails to his kids, and I think he sent them to them when they hit their teenage years, but he had been writing to them ever since they were young kids. So I joke about your answer being wrong. Clearly it was right.
I love that you picked that up and that you're doing that. That is something that we talk about in the book. And I'm going to take your word for what the first step to do is. And what's cool is that you can write that letter even if you don't have a child on the way or you don't have a child yet.
Yeah, but and the thing is, like, whenever I'm coaching somebody, Rachel, is I always want somebody to quick victory, and what you said, getting the thoughts about what you want the family to look like and that sort of stuff. But everybody could right now just write a 50-word letter to their children that the child might not read for 10 years, just about how much they love them, why they're doing this, why they're sacrificing, and their optimism for them, and all that sort of stuff. And you go and write that, you get that victory, and that gives you the dopamine hit to give you momentum and motivation to come back and take action on the bigger chunks of this puzzle, such as the wills and trusts and all that sort of stuff. So I really enjoyed your book, Rachel. I really love the questions. I love the exercises, the stories about you and your family, and explaining the situation. And so I was my last question for you was going to be, how old was your child that you talked about, in the first story of the book? And I didn't realize that she was only 2 years old, but in the past 2 years, as you've been given kind of, it's almost, you could say, you got a second chance at life, and you've put so much of this stuff together. What comes next for you and the family? What is there anything that remains in your generational wealth plan that you have yet to figure out? And what's the future hold aside from the book?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it's interesting that as I'm getting ready to release the book, I've had some families come to me already and ask that I coach them through this process of really designing their family guidance system. And, something that's arisen through that is that, we have it all written down, but that doesn't mean we've arrived, because writing it down means that we have this great space between our vision that we've written and where we currently live to live into that gap. And that means every single day we're looking at how can we be better as a family. And something that we're really digging into right now is I'll give a shout out to Family Teams, this group that really is focused on developing family teams that are multi-generational teams on mission. And we've just been using a lot of their exercises even to say, how do we grow as a family? How do we have family meetings? And we've started having family meetings. We have daily family meetings. Actually, this is kudos to you as well. You mentioned having daily team meetings. We're like, well, our family is our greatest team. Let's have a daily family huddles, and we can start the day correctly, and we can strategize and give the plan for what's coming up next. And we have a weekly family meeting on Monday nights at the dinner table, and we say, all right, what went really well this week? What didn't go well? What's our one way that we're going to improve going forward? And we've had those meetings for several, I would say probably at least 6 weeks in a row now. And we're saying, okay, well, how do we continue to build on this, and how do we keep growing? And so we're just continually trying to grow and become better as a family, supporting our kids' skill sets, but we're just looking at how do we build the life that we ultimately want to create, and how do we develop the character and capacity in our kids. And so we are absolutely always seeking to get better and figure out how to live that out.
Well, it sounds like it'd be worth a discussion as you really dial in those family meetings in the future. So Rachel, this has been fantastic. Let's just remind everybody of the name of your book, and then obviously they'll be able to get on Amazon. Do you have like an upcoming website that you're going to have for it as well, or how can people get a hold of you? And what's the name of your podcast that I've also been on?
Yes. So the book is called 7 Generations: Designing Your Multi-Generational Legacy of More Than Money. And that will be coming in the future. I'll say within between now and the end of spring of next year. The goal was this fall, but we're looking like it's going to be out a little ways past that. So I don't have a deadline or a date right now, but I will say, if you want to find out anything else about the work that we do, you can hop on over to The Money Advantage. That's THE moneyadvantage.com. And we have everything available in our business there. We have a podcast, we have articles and blogs, and we have a guide on exactly what is infinite banking, the type of life insurance that I mentioned earlier, and how that can help you boost and increase investment returns without taking on additional risk. Really just a way to have a cornerstone in your financial plan for your life and for your legacy planning. So we have a guide that's free there. We also have a course if you want to deep dive on that. And if you want to meet with an advisor to really dig into how to optimize your financial life and help you accomplish all of your goals and do it better and faster, we can meet with you on our advisor team as well. And you can book on our calendar, which is right on our homepage at themoneyadvantage.com as well.
That's amazing. So Rachel, thank you so much for explaining this. And there's so much more in your book, including the exercises that will help people through this. So super excited for this to come out. We'll share it when it finally does. And, we'll put the work back in your hands for you to get going and finish it off. And, just let me know when it's out there and we'll share it with the world. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. It has just been a delight talking with you tonight. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I learned so much. And thank you so much, Rachel, and wishing you all the best with the book and the business.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. Blessings to you and your work.